Kia ora, and thanks for joining us on this webinar today. My name is Mel, and I'm Kea's Global Partnerships and Engagement Director, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Joining me today are our panel of experts from BNZ, BDO, and Abel. But before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. Our session today is being recorded and will be available on Kea's website later today. If you have any questions at all for our panelists, please submit them via the Q&A function at any stage, and we will have some time allotted at the end to go through them. So let's start with a brief background about Kea. Kea was founded in 2001 when many of our best and brightest were heading overseas. So Stephen Tyndall and Professor David Teese recognised that for a nation as small and geographically remote as Aotearoa, our offshore Kiwi are crucial to our connectedness to the world. 20 years on from its inception, Kea continues to focus on our extraordinary offshore Kiwi and connecting them to each other and to New Zealand to support our export-led economic growth targets. In addition, we continue to highlight inspiring Kiwi doing amazing mahi offshore and champion the success of Kiwi export businesses and showcase New Zealand the significant opportunities in connecting with these amazing offshore and returning Kiwi through dedicated research and results. Which brings us to today. To support these returning and returned Kiwi with an interest in starting a new business or bringing a business with them, we're here to provide you with some insights on how you can manage this transition. So let's kick things off. Joining us today, we have BNZ's Chief Economist, Paul Conway, who will set the scene. So Paul, can you give us an overview on New Zealand's economy, including how businesses are faring right now, industries that are leading the way, and opportunities to be starting or bringing a business to Aotearoa?
Hi, Tamarie, everybody. Thanks, Mel. Can I just start with a shout out to Kea? I was an expat living in Paris in 2001, and I remember, the excitement of thinking, oh yeah, Kiwis are getting together and sort of connecting with offshore Kiwis. I thought it was great at the time, and it's cool that you're still here and where you've got to 20 years on. Okay, in terms of your question, Mel, so you want a little bit of an economic overview, and then you're talking about what industries are sort of leading the way in New Zealand. And then a third bit is any sort of reflections on bringing a business home to Aotearoa. I guess no one on the call will be too surprised to hear me say that it's been a bumpy road for the New Zealand economy over the last 18 months or so. We've had some huge swings in our economy. For example, I guess, GDP is sort of the catch-all metric of that, and it plunged by 10% in the second quarter of last year. Because of our first nationwide lockdown, and then it sort of leapt ahead by 14% in the third quarter, just completely outrageous swings in economic output. We'll also no doubt see a plunge in GDP in the third quarter of this year because of the Delta lockdown that Aucklanders in particular are still enduring. But the indications are that the sort of machinations of the economy this time around won't be as extreme as what we lived through last year, and I fully acknowledge the Aucklanders are completely over it, which is fair enough. But there's less of a sense of uncertainty this time. There's less of a sense that economic Armageddon is just around the corner as there was last year. And I think part of the reason for that is that we've got better at shopping and working online. And that sort of adoption of digital tools and technologies has made our economy just a little bit more resilient in the face of lockdowns, which is not to say it's plain sailing, far from it. Some parts of our economy are really hurting at the moment. Hospitality, tourism, entertainment, they're pretty much ground zero for this thing. And I think we're going to see stresses and strains and creative destruction and businesses going under in some parts of our economy for, well, years to come, really, as a result of COVID. But at the other end of the spectrum, some businesses really have managed to do quite well over the last 18 months or so. And a really important indicator of that is how sort of digitized a business is. So businesses that have managed to enable themselves digitally, have been able to pivot to e-commerce, have done quite well. Whereas businesses that are all about that face-to-face contact less so. So, for example, our tech sector is going extremely well. Agri-tech is doing some exciting stuff. Clean tech even the space industry in New Zealand. Yes, the space industry. There's plenty of areas of excitement in our economy currently. On balance, coming into this Delta lockdown, the economy was running hot, a little bit too hot. We had this sort of fiscal and monetary policy stimulus coming through to place a huge surge in demand. But on the supply side, there were issues with logistics, supply chains, and in the labour market, migration has pretty much stopped. So labour is in short supply. So it's sort of a shortage economy, and there is inflation in our economy currently, and interest rates are going up and wages are going up, and it's a good time to be a worker. In terms of getting a business going here in Aotearoa, I absolutely think there is some good opportunities. I think the pandemic has made us more receptive to change. I think things are moving in our economy, and I think it's a very interesting time. I actually think we're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of the New Zealand economy, and there's lots of thinking going into sort of reimagining our economy with the idea of becoming solutions focused rather than commodity driven. And I think there's lots of opportunity, as I said, in front of us if we choose to take that opportunity. And that's a big if. There is still a sense of kind of sleepy old New Zealand in some parts of our economy. And I think, I've heard stories of some returning expats being a bit disappointed with the range of opportunities that are in front of them on coming home. But I think the best way to forecast the future is to create it. So, get into it is my message to those guys. Thanks, Mel.
Fantastic.
Did you want me to keep going, or?
Yes.
Okay,
yep.
so.
Sorry, Paul, just technical difficulties there.
Okay.
So as we rebuild in the wake of the pandemic, you briefly mentioned digital technology. So we know digital is key for us to build back better. Can you share a bit more of your thoughts around how digital skills and tech can improve our productivity and connectivity with the world?
Yep, absolutely. Just a bit of a warning, I can get a little evangelical when I talk about the digital opportunity in front of New Zealand. Done well, the international experience has been that digital transformation, it brings benefits no matter where businesses are globally situated. But for us in New Zealand, technology really is moving in ways that suit us, which is why I'm optimistic about New Zealand's long-run economic prospects. So new technologies are changing everything, provided we know how to use it. We are living through the fourth industrial revolution. And I think perhaps the biggest deal for us is that new technologies or digital technologies make it easier to do business across distance. So they lower the cost of doing business across distance, which allows businesses to expand beyond their geography. In New Zealand, our economic geography has been a bit of a handbrake for the last few decades, and digital, it sort of pushes back against those economic forces. So, that's why the tech sector makes sense for us here in Aotearoa. Knowledge, it's light. We can trade it down fibre optic cables, which is awesome. So digital is making it easier for Kiwi innovations to get noticed internationally. It's making it easier for us to tell its story. Even for a typically small New Zealand business, digital is making it easier for them to connect internationally with all the benefits that brings. And I just think that's a huge opportunity. Of course, digital adoption, it's not automatic. It doesn't just happen. We've got lots of mahi, lots of work in front of us if we're to make the most of this digital opportunity. Otherwise, technology can have negative consequences, such as increased inequality, which we don't want. So there's a huge agenda there in terms of improving our skills system, the way we do innovation, investment in capital, infrastructure. There's a long list. I'm not much of a forecaster when it comes to the economy, because I think the best way to forecast the future is to create it. And I think there's lots of opportunity in the digital space for New Zealand to create a really exciting economy going forward. Thanks, Mel. I'll leave it at that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that overview, Paul. It's clearly a critical time for New Zealand's businesses and our economy, but it's great to hear that there are some opportunities for us to grow and move and change if we take that challenge up.
Absolutely.
So next up, we have Shaneen T from BDO Auckland. She's a tax associate, and as we all know, tax is an important consideration for business owners and founders. Shaneen will share with us some of the insights and the things to be aware of when starting or bringing a business home. So Shaneen, from a tax perspective, what are the major implications, or what are the things that people really need to think about or be aware of when starting a business in New Zealand?
Thanks, Mel. That's a very big topic to cover in one short session. So I'll try to converse a few key issues within the time frame I have, and I always welcome our audience to contact me directly with your specific questions after the session. So I have 4 main points, or 4 main suggestions for a person who is starting a business in New Zealand. The first one is understand New Zealand tax rules. So covering the basics, there are 3 main tax types in New Zealand that you have to register for if you operate a business in New Zealand: income tax, GST, and payroll taxes. So the income tax rate differs depending on the legal structure you choose to adopt. So for corporate, it's 28%. For trust, it's 33%. For sole trader, it is an individual marginal tax rate. And for partnership, it's the partner's tax rate. The GST tax rate in New Zealand is 15%. It is compulsory to register for GST if your annual sales exceeds $60,000 per annum. And when you assess your sales threshold, you have to look at both domestic and sales to overseas non-residents. Payroll taxes. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of getting your payroll taxes right. So payroll taxes includes PAYE, fringe benefit tax, and employer services contribution tax. If your business employs staff, you must register for payroll tax and be particularly diligent about your paperwork and paying taxes on time. Because Inland Revenue sees payroll tax as trust money, so they will be very pedantic in chasing you down and making sure that you comply with your payroll tax obligations. My one suggestion is there's a lot of payroll service providers around in the marketplace that charges a reasonable fee. So have a look at those, hunt around for a good deal for you when you are looking to employ staff. So my second suggestion for someone who is starting a business in New Zealand is to get your legal and finance structure right up front. So spend some time upfront looking at an appropriate structure for you, because it may yield long-term tax savings for you. So if I give an example, if you borrow from the bank to finance the acquisition of a business, who should be the borrower? Should it be the business or should it be you? The key concern we have from a tax perspective is who should benefit from the interest deduction? Where should it be? Where should you structure it to get the maximum benefit of the interest deduction? Another example is trustees' tax rate. At a headline level, it is higher than the corporate tax rate. However, a trust structure may be more suitable for a business that is expecting to make capital gain over the long run, as it enables easier distribution of profits. So just a few things to think about. My third suggestion for someone starting a business in New Zealand is to manage your indirect tax cost. So I'm thinking of GST, custom tax. So do you understand how that works for your business? So a few examples. If you import your goods for resale in New Zealand, you do not have to register for GST because you're under the threshold. Nevertheless, should you register just so you can claim back customs GST? Second example, if you are planning to import a large volume of goods through the border, should you apply for deferred payment account with New Zealand Customs? Because that will allow you to defer your custom duty for up to 7 weeks, which could generate a significant cash flow benefit. For example, if you're selling to overseas customers, do you know that you can actually charge GST at 0% in certain situations? So this means that you can claim GST on your expenses and on your purchases and charge GST at 0%. So this is a huge advantage for you. My last suggestion for someone starting a business in New Zealand is to get your accounting system set up correctly. I have seen a lot of clients who kicked off their business with an Excel spreadsheet as their accounting system, thinking that it will be enough for them until the business grows. However, the Excel spreadsheet does not allow them to issue invoices in a timely manner, therefore resulting in a delay in cash flow coming in. It does not show them their aged debtors. It does not capture expense details. It does not capture the details that is necessary to file GST return. So I encourage someone who's looking to start a business to look into an accounting system upfront. It is reasonable cost and it will benefit you in the long run. So the common systems used in New Zealand, as well as MYOB. So those are my four main suggestions for someone who's looking to start a business.
Thanks, Shaneen. So in terms of people who are operating their overseas businesses from here in New Zealand, so for Kiwi coming home who want to continue running their offshore business, but here in New Zealand, what are the tax implications and the tips and tricks, I suppose, that they need to know before they move over here or once they get over here?
I will focus on someone who is already has an existing business and plans to operate it from New Zealand. So I have three main questions for those people. The first question I have is, are you managing your double tax exposure if you plan to operate your business in New Zealand? So if I give a very simple example, you have an Australian business, you have an Australian company that you will continue to run remotely from New Zealand. The company earns income from Australia, therefore paying Australian tax at 26%. The company distributes profit to you, a dividend. Now, as a New Zealand tax resident, you will be taxed on that dividend receipt. You will have to pay New Zealand marginal tax rate. The Australian tax that you paid will generate franking credit, but that is useless because you cannot use that against your New Zealand tax liability. So you have to pay New Zealand tax on that dividend income. So your overall tax liability can be as high as 54.9% on every dollar of profit you earn. So my suggestion is spend some time upfront looking at your structures because there are tax efficiencies that can be gained in certain circumstances. So if you have an existing business, you have choices in terms of how you structure your operation. These include migrating the overseas company so it becomes a New Zealand tax resident. You can operate the overseas company remotely and retain its overseas tax residency. You can incorporate a New Zealand subsidiary of the overseas company. You can set up a branch, a New Zealand branch of the overseas company. You can also set up a new company independent from the overseas company. There are a lot of options. So there's no one size fits all. The answer really depends on the superstructure really depends on the business model as well as your plan for the business. So my second question for someone who has an existing overseas business planning to operate it from New Zealand is, are you making full use of the transitional residency exemption? So what is the transitional residency exemption? So this is a tax exemption for returning New Zealanders as well as new New Zealand tax residents. So as most of you will be aware, as a New Zealand tax resident, you will be taxed on your worldwide income. However, if you qualify for the transitional residency exemption, for the first 4 years of you being a New Zealand tax resident, you will be exempt on your overseas income. That means you don't have to pay income tax on your overseas income. There are exclusions for personal services income and employment income. And this is open for all returning New Zealanders who have been absent from New Zealand for more than 10 years, as well as new New Zealand tax residents. So my suggestion is, on the return to New Zealand, have a look at this exemption and use it to your advantage in the first 4 years of your return, plan your affairs accordingly. My last question for someone who is operating an overseas business in New Zealand is have a look at payroll taxes. So if the overseas company pays you a salary, Inland Revenue may require that the overseas company register as a New Zealand employer and account for PAYE on the salary. You will want to manage this upfront rather than trade for a few years and you realize that you have a problem. At that point in time, not only do you have to cough up tax, you also have to look at interest and penalties. Not a discussion that you want to have with IRD at that stage. So I realize that there's a lot of information to digest. So again, please feel free to reach out to me to discuss your specific situation. Thanks, Mel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shaneen, for sharing those tax tips. Obviously, a lot of things for people to consider when starting or bringing a business back. And for those who do want to get in contact with Shaneen after this webinar, please contact Kea and we can connect you. So next we have Frances Shoemack from Abel. Frances and her family returned home to New Zealand from Amsterdam last year and brought with her the business she founded, a natural perfume company called Abel. For almost a decade, Abel has been on a quest to create the world's best 100% natural perfume without compromising on ethics or aesthetics. So let's hear a bit more from Francis. Francis, so if you could tell us a little bit more about how you built Abel, what's next for you now that you've brought the business back to Aotearoa?
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Mel. And pleasure to be here this morning. Kia ora, everyone. I think I'm a bit croaky, apologies for that. There's a lot to be said for, the space that you're at and the making decision moment. So I'll share with you a bit about our story, and hopefully it might help to inform, the various ways you can kind of piece the puzzle together at this point, because it's kind of an open question. So I founded Abel 8 years ago. We moved back in January last year, so it was very lucky timing, I have to say. And since then, I've been in a process of, let's say, transitioning the kind of axle for Abel from Amsterdam to Wellington. We are still at this point producing all of our perfume in Amsterdam, and we export from an Amsterdam hub. But we're just almost ready to go live with a little factory here in Wellington, where we will produce our first New Zealand made line next month. So it's been a real transition period for us. I remember when I first told people, we moved to Amsterdam thinking we'd be there a couple of years. It turned into 10 with a business and a family. And the intention was always to move home. So in many ways, that kind of dictated the way that I set up the business in Amsterdam. Not putting down roots too deep, so that we could move it when we wanted to. And so we have, now that we're here, we're really starting to put down our roots. So that's perhaps the most fulfilling, gratifying part of moving home, is that we can really start to build the community, take on long-term leases, invest in building up the team and things like that. So in terms of, I wrote down a long list of challenges and opportunities. The challenge list was a little bit longer, I have to be honest, than the opportunity list, but I think it's not a weighted scale. So we're really happy with our decision to move home, and it's been a really good move for the business, contrary to what, when I told partners that we were moving a perfume business from Europe to New Zealand, their response was, "Are you mental?" You're just going as far away from the major markets as you can. You're isolated, and this was before COVID. So, you're isolating yourself in such a crazy way. But I think the opportunities come with that as well. So challenges, logistics, it's an obvious one, but again, there are people out there, I guess, who are moving an existing business, but for those of you who are thinking of starting a business in New Zealand, there's a way that you can design the business to, to Paul's points, you can, look at the industry that you want to tap into, because I think a product business is difficult from New Zealand, but a technology business, there's actually a lot of benefits. So the time zone becomes an opportunity rather than a hindrance, in the sense that, I've talked to several people who Europe love working with them, because basically they're busy working, while Europeans are sleeping. So I think to those of you who are considering what kind of business you would start here, that would be my advice. Design it in a way that works for New Zealand. Use the opportunity. But with the logistics, if you are thinking of moving a product business, don't underestimate the impact. I mean, supply chain has gone from being, kind of 4 or 5 down the list of what's important, to number 1 in the last year. We had a sea freight that left Amsterdam for New Zealand in January, and it arrived at the end of August. So and it went via Panama, of all places. I'm tracking the sea freight going, what the hell are you doing in Panama? So logistics, don't underestimate it. Time zone, I mentioned, it's a challenge, but I think it's also an opportunity. So do look at it that way. It's a genuine way to look at it. For a product business, again, this is my realm, but you might be surprised at what you can source locally. I know I was. This New Zealand made line that we're we're launching, I idealistically thought, let's use all New Zealand components. Not possible, even to the point where we spent a couple of months working on a bespoke part with a supplier in Christchurch, only for them to pull the pin at the last minute and us to go, okay, France it is, So yeah, again, product challenges, but good to be aware of. Shaneen talked a lot about the tax stuff. Definitely good to be thinking about that. Things that you wouldn't have thought make a huge difference, but for example, financial year reporting in New Zealand, the end of March situation, for an existing business, it's just a bit of a pain because none of your annual accounts make sense anymore. Maybe good just to note at that point that we closed down in Amsterdam and started a new business in New Zealand. So to your point, Shaneen, about the various options, that's how we chose to do it. I think it was the right decision for us. There were complications with, we couldn't set up a New Zealand business until we had a director with a local address. And because my husband and I are the two directors, we couldn't get that set up until we literally landed. But I was also trying to at the same time get a visa for one of my Dutch team to come out to New Zealand with me. So yeah, you've all moved countries before, so you understand the complexity. I remember it being the same in Holland. You couldn't get a bank account till you had a job, till you had a house, so you're in that kind of loop. Just expect that and know that there is a path through that. So that's what I would say. And then the last one about the challenges was really everybody talked about reverse culture shock, or you'll get home and you'll mourn your old life, and I thought, oh, that's not me. I love New Zealand. I wanted to move home. I have no intention of getting down in the dumps about that, but I have to say we're 20 months or something here, and it's only been the last couple of months that I think, oh yeah, okay, we've landed. I spent a lot of time mourning my own old life, which that's the way it is. So I would say expect that both from a personal and a professional point of view. So the reverse culture shock. I was living in Holland and, brutally honest culture, which I came to love. And I'd find myself sitting in a meeting in New Zealand thinking, oh my God, could someone say what they actually mean, or what they actually think? Can we stop talking in circles, So I think it's that feeling of by the time you leave, you may well find that you were more accustomed to, the Kiwi culture will feel more foreign to you, perhaps, than what you've left. So just good to bear in mind. And also when you're starting up here, take your blinkers off about Kiwi culture, those things. I had a couple of situations where I thought we'd agreed on something, but actually we hadn't, because they were just, yeah, nice, cool, we can do that. Can you do it, or will you do it? So I think you kind of have to find your way there. So that's all the challenges. I hope I'm not running too long now. No, cool. Opportunity-wise, I mentioned it before, but a big one for me is that kind of ability to put down roots, and I can't overstate the impact that has on giving your business a platform from which to grow. You're thinking long term. You can really be part of the community, and the Kiwi community, I think it's incredible. So definitely the support that I felt since moving here. One of my next points was the commitment to buying local and supporting local businesses. It's huge. It's really very strong. I know there's been a little bit of backlash about returning Kiwis, but I think, to be honest, I think that's all but gone. Mel, you might correct, but yeah, there was a bit of a tension last year, I think, but from my understanding anyway, it's people's realised that returning expats are really bringing an incredible boost to the economy. They're bringing global outlook and all these things. So The tapping into that local network's awesome. This is a funny one, but I underestimated. So 90% of our business is export, as in not New Zealand. When we moved home, I would say 99% of our business was export. And I really thought New Zealand was just nothing for us. And I kind of didn't see it as a legit opportunity potentially either, you know. New Zealand, 4 or 5 million people, the US, you know, hundreds of millions. So nice if you're thinking there really is a solid base here and you really can, you know, we went from nothing to 10% of our business, you know, in our first year operating here. And I think it is a real opportunity. So whether, again, how you're structuring your business, if it's a new business, you might choose to start with New Zealand first. You know, it will be difficult to let go of wherever you came from, but I think there really is, it's a legit market here, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So don't assume that you can't really grow your domestic sales in New Zealand. What else have I got? Regional and national support. So actually, again, a shout out to Kea. You know, starting a business in Amsterdam, there was no local support, let's say, because I wasn't local. You can't tap into the New Zealand support, but Kea was incredible. When we did our launch, our press launch in London, they hooked us up with New Zealand House, which was amazing, incredible spot to have a perfume launch. But that was, until we moved home, that was kind of my only experience with any kind of support. And so since moving here at a regional level, Wellington, New Zealand has been incredibly supportive. At a national and export level, NZTE is an incredible resource. So yeah, I think, again, as an expat, there's huge opportunities there. I think that's kind of it. And look, I said expect the squiggly line. You're not going to be able to foresee what's happened. You know, it's the same as starting a business. I often say it's like having a baby. You know, you've kind of just got to do it and find your way with it, because, you know, all the parenting books in the world are not going to teach you how to survive those, you know, late nights, early mornings, etc. And I think the business is the same thing. Moving countries, it's the same thing. So I would say just do it. But for anyone out there thinking, you know, I don't have an idea, I would say look around you before you leave. You know, I was on a call with one of my colleagues, and so we've still got a person in Amsterdam, person in Boston, and then building up the team here. But Elise in Amsterdam said the other morning, is it really big in New Zealand, those 10-minute supermarket deliveries? And I said, oh, what are you talking about? And she said, yeah, Amsterdam, like the last 12 months, there's this huge, you know, these little logistics hubs, and you can order and they guarantee delivery 10 minutes anywhere in the city. I said, absolutely not, you know, definitely not. So, but could it be huge? Yeah, potentially. So I would, you know, as a kind of low-hanging fruit recommendation for me, take it or leave it, but look around you at a business model that's doing really well where you are, and chances are it may not be here yet. So that's a big opportunity. Thank you. I think that's enough.
Thanks, Frances. That's really, really interesting to hear your challenges and opportunities, and great advice for people to just get in there and give it a go. And as you mentioned, Kea, we are certainly championing all of our returning Kiwi and telling New Zealand what a great opportunity it is to tap into their global networks and their expertise to help them grow their businesses. So finally, to round things out today, I'm pleased to introduce Brandon Jackson, Head of Growth Sectors at BNZ, who will share a little bit more about the business support ecosystem from BNZ to Kea and many others across the country. So Brandon, BNZ have been instrumental in helping Kiwi businesses achieve their goals, and most recently supporting them as they navigate the challenges of the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing in this space and highlight some of the growth sectors that you're seeing across the country?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Yeah, good day, everybody. The pandemic's been pretty uneven in its treatment of businesses, fair to say. I'd say there's been the unfortunate and the fortunate. It's a very challenging time for some businesses in New Zealand due to our response to COVID, and for others it's record years due to the artificial pump priming of the economy and them being allowed to sort of operate as usual. And I feel very sorry for some people. I was wandering through the neighbourhood the other night, last night, saw a few businesses that are sort of entertainment businesses and kids playground sort of businesses that have shut down, which is pretty sad. But you know, on the positive side, I'm sort of proud to note in terms of support that the BNZ at one stage last year was lending 77 cents in every dollar of the government's business finance scheme, and having used that up, we sort of earmarked a large chunk of our own capital under our Good to Grow scheme to support New Zealand businesses if needed. So I guess that's just one example of how New Zealand sort of rallying to support each other. And that comment sort of raised an interesting point for anyone coming back to New Zealand to set up a business. The appetite your bank has in general, and the appetite they'll have in your chosen sector is going to be important in getting credit. So brokers are good barometers of what's happening in the housing market, and I'm sort of hearing from them that the triple CFA, sort of the new regulation is causing the banks to slow down on housing loan credit as they try and get their heads around it, which they will eventually, but it just means it's slow at the moment. Whilst on the other hand, business credit is reasonably okay, varied at some banks, but generally okay for business. We're pretty good at BNZ with growth mandate in many sectors, but my point is if you're setting up business, being aware of your bank's appetite is important. Given my title as head of growth sectors, I guess I see the more positive side of things. I know there's some real issues getting into New Zealand right now, and I've mentioned the uneven fortunes for some businesses. But if I look a little bit further forward past the immediate future, my view is it's quite an exciting time in New Zealand business in a number of ways. And everybody sort of touched on it previous to me speaking, but there's a sense that technology has reduced the challenge of New Zealand's distance from the rest of the world, with COVID being a big driver of this. It appears that more and more Kiwis are thinking big, we're thinking global, and aided by technology. And when we see that, we talk to our younger customers, they're automatically thinking offshore, bigger market, got to get there. So New Zealand continues to do that innovative niche stuff we do reasonably well. We're still really good at growing food, we're surprisingly good at technology, and we tend to excel in niches solving problems. And also, if we get our immigration settings right, and don't miss the opportunity that's ahead of us, there's a wave of capital seeking a home in New Zealand at the moment, and that could potentially transform our economy and help solve some of our long-term challenges. So I really hope we get that right. In terms of opportunities, what are the growth areas? I'll talk a little bit about the sectors that BNZ focuses on. And there is the risk, I've got to say, that this tends to skew to tech and slightly newer businesses, because we're trying to help New Zealand grow sunrise industries, we're trying to help them digitise, and we want them to embrace e-commerce. But there are plenty of businesses in the traditional areas, just off the top of my head, demolition, construction, farming services, services to construction, et cetera. In fact, if there's one strong message I'd say that I'm constantly reminded of the number of really good businesses in New Zealand that fly under the radar and do extremely well. So, there is a lot of opportunity without even despite the uneven playing field at the moment. So we have 6 sectors that we sort of focus on: technology industries, international business, which is high net worth migrants and essential workers, Asia business, healthcare, export, and professionals. And we see these as the sectors that have opportunities for New Zealand and BNZ. And to these 6 sectors, we're adding subsectors, which is to either build out and really embed existing capability, or to build new muscle in areas like emerging sunrise industries, that we know that we got to get better at, and we want to try and help them get better. So, for example, in the tech sector, we're BNZ is the biggest bank funded by a country mile. We're developing 6 subsectors, tech subsectors that, I guess it's just to sort of say what we're looking at, and it may be of any interest to anybody watching. We're looking at mid-health tech, clean tech, which is your energy, your recycling, power, sustainability. There's massive growth there. Creative tech. So there's a government push to try and get more Māori and Pacifica into these higher productivity digi-creative areas, and where natural storytellers has a real opportunity there. Agri-tech, and which Paul has mentioned, the world is moving to smarter, more sustainable, regenerative farming, and there's heaps of opportunity there. And obviously, we're really good at that. FinTech and emerging tech, which is where we sort of have a catch-all for all the technology that comes out in other buckets. We've got over 1,400 tech customers, and we're deepening this capability to try and match the market and the opportunity. And then there's the other areas that we're focusing on, and we're taking our first steps to really build capability in these emerging industries: medicinal cannabis, hemp, space industry, and the e-commerce skill set. Paul already mentioned it before, but it may surprise some of you to know that New Zealand's space industry is now roughly the same value and contribution to New Zealand as our wine industry, which is, going from about 0 to close to 2 billion in not much more than a decade, which is pretty phenomenal. 5,000 jobs directly, 7,000 jobs indirectly. And as every other speaker has mentioned, e-commerce in New Zealand, really important. It grew 31% to 4 billion last year. So we'd stress to think of how you use technology in your business and use digital platforms to scale quickly. One of my favourite stories is of a small New Zealand company that we've helped fund a few years ago. It opened up business in the USA, got a YouTuber influencer on board, and has grown from a couple of million revenue to 20 odd million revenue literally 4 years later, with plans to double that. And probably the long-term ambition is to hit 100 million in terms of turnover. And the lessons from that story for anybody that's thinking of coming home is the value of being in a business network to find relevant expertise, making sure you've got a supportive bank, making sure you've got advisors to structure things properly, which you would have already deduced from this other panelists speaking today. And think big, think of accessing bigger international markets. Logistic challenges aside, which will inevitably change as COVID settles down and vaccinations take over, one would imagine. So those big markets are really important to us. Probably stop there, Mel, I think.
Mel's just crashed, so do you want to just wind up your questions there? Yeah,
so
thanks.
Okay, so I think the second part of the question was about people wanting to come back. How can we assist and how can we help them connect to domestic and global markets? So in terms of getting set up, for those who don't already have a bank account set up or a banking relationship in place, BNZ can help you set up bank accounts while you're overseas. We're one of the few operators that can do that, possibly the only bank that can do that. As we have a team that specialises in this, we sort of take the pain out of anti-money laundering and KYC, which is know your customer. It's a real pain. There's no getting around it, but we can take a lot of the headache out. So if you're in this boat, reach out and we'll help you out. With setting up a business in New Zealand, there's a couple of observations to make as a boring old banker with my risk hat on. Where we've seen things go wrong in the past is people, smart people coming back from overseas, they get into areas they don't know or understand, or they don't have people around them who know the business. Probably the consistent theme I'd push here is do what you know well, recognise the value of the network you surround yourself with, and pay for advice. I mean, it was pretty obvious from some of the comments before that the value of advice is just going to save you a whole lot of time and potential heartbreak. I'd also point out that one of the great underestimated features of a good bank and a good banker, there is such a thing apparently, is the network they can help you access. Be this other business owners, professionals, advisors, business brokers, or investors. And the good thing about it is that they don't charge in 6-minute increments, and it's all free. So look, for example, we partner with Kea to access global expertise. We're setting up connected groups of experts and members, and in different partner centres around the country. And the purpose of that is to grow business knowledge and share expertise. Our 6 growth sector heads that report to me are specifically tasked with helping customers grow, and just a couple of examples there. Jason Reeves, who's our head of export, connected one of the customers to they make honey infused water. They connected them to Kea to access Dubai and that market, which has helped sales grow. I personally have taken delegations to China and Japan to leverage government and bank contacts and try and help our customers get, foster deeper relationships. Tim Wixon, who's our head of technology industries, has taken a tech delegation to the west coast of the US and Canada. And you might think, well, that won't happen for a while, which may be the case, but it's not. I don't think it's too far away in the midterm. And look, we've introduced customers to venture capital investors to learn what they're looking for and how to shape their companies accordingly. All of which, saves customers time, effort, spreads knowledge, gives insight, and is very valuable. I guess I'm repeating the point, but access to information and experts is important. Banks and your own natural network that you develop when you come back is going to be important. And Frances sort of touched on this before, and I didn't know what she was going to say. I'm just going to wind up by saying, I spent 10 years overseas in Japan before coming back to New Zealand, and my advice is it's going to take you 2 years before you stop feeling like you should be somewhere else, like you should be jumping on a plane, going back somewhere else, that you're, you know, maybe I'm not sure I should be here, should be somewhere else and back overseas. I think you said 20 months, Francis, so 24 is the magic number. After 24, you know, it feels like you put down roots. I've talked to a lot of expats that have been in the same boat since I came back in 2005, and that 2-year mark seems to be the magic mark. After that, you feel like you belong, your family feels like you belong, you feels like you put roots down. So I guess I'll stop there if that's all I've got to say, really. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brandon, and apologies for the glitch just then. So I'm conscious of time, but we do have quite a few questions here from our audience today. So I'm just going to pick 2, just so we can wrap up on time and let people get on with their days. So the first question, I've kind of combined a couple of questions here, but it's for Shaneen, and it's looking at people who are coming home from the US who have a business over there and would like to know what the corporation tax rate is in New Zealand for startups, and what pre-work is required prior to relocating your business from the US to New Zealand. So, for example, do you need to apply for the transitional residency exemption before you return?
Thanks, Mel. So there's actually 2 questions in there. The first one is transitional residency exemption, and the second one is the pre-work to migrate US company to New Zealand. So I'll address the transitional residency exemption first. So the transitional residency exemption is automatic exemption, provided you qualify. You do not have to apply to Inland Revenue to get that exemption. It is an exemption that is available for new New Zealand tax residents, as well as New Zealand. So as well as residents who have left New Zealand for more than 10 years. So you have to meet either one of those criteria to be eligible for that exemption. So once you are eligible, then for the first 4 years of your return to New Zealand, your overseas income will be exempt from New Zealand tax. The exclusions are personal services income and employment income. Those will continue to be subject to New Zealand tax. The second question you've asked, Mel, is what are the pre-works necessary before you migrate back to New Zealand? I think in my session just now, I would say, first of all, think about the structure. How do you want to continue operating your business? As I mentioned before, there are a lot of options, so decide which one is most suitable for you, and it will depend on your business model. How will you continue to run your business? Are you planning to run it remotely? Are you planning to run it locally? Are you planning to operate both overseas and local? And that will drive the structure that is appropriate for you. Once you have decided on structure, and if you decide to incorporate a New Zealand company, then it is a relatively straightforward process. Company offers usually, I usually tell the client within a week, you should have a company that is registered and all the tax registration done. But before you start that process, have a think about the appropriate structure, have a think about the tax registrations that you need, have a think about the directors who should sit on the board of the company, have a think about who should the shareholders be. That would make the whole process easier for you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Shaneen. And lucky last question is for Brandon, and it's a question that we get quite a bit at Kea as well. So what are your thoughts or comments on raising capital at the very early stages of a business? And the comment here is especially for those recent returnees who haven't benefited from the housing boom, so can't leverage that. Brandon.
Yeah, good question. It's never easy, is it, at that stage? First thing to say is always have a business plan, because banks can bank plans and investors can invest in plans. So have a business plan, figure that out. As I said previously, there's going to be a wave of capital coming. So, and what I mean by that is a number of, it hasn't been announced officially, but it's kind of, it's been hinted at by the government that, you know, the high net worth migrants that have got to be in New Zealand, and there's a number of them looking to be here, will have to invest a greater amount. And also after 12 months, we'll have to get that investment into companies, venture capital, private equity and the like. So that's, my personal view is that's going to change things big time in New Zealand. So there's going to be a lot of capital running around. There already is in terms of investors looking for a smart idea. So I'd say have a business plan. if you're looking to get into a more traditional business, you know, there's with all due respect, an aging boomer population that wants to get out, wants to realise the value in their businesses. So there's vendor loan opportunities. You can step in, step out. There's a company called Platform One that has its own a model where they find people, match them to a business. And you know, there's a 6-month period to see whether it's going to work, and then you buy into the business and effectively leverage the balance of leverage the balance sheet of the company with the guidance of the existing owner to you know, grow it and grow your equity as they step theirs out. There's you know, banks will look at you. In terms of information and support, there's all kinds of information on Callaghan Innovation website, MB, and even WINS for, you know, getting started, that sort of thing. Every bank has small business knowledge information. And in terms of probably something to be aware of is that, like, there's a massive talent shortage in New Zealand, and the rest of the world is experiencing the same thing. Most of the world is declining, and the populations are declining. Only a couple of countries are growing, and so there's a worldwide talent shortage. So and with the businesses that are already in existence, people are looking for others to come in to drive the business forward. People with skills. So there's sweat equity options. There's, you know, if you step in that way, there's MBO, MBI. You know, and obviously, like I said before, banks can fund a plan. So it's never easy right at the beginning, and there's a number of options. It's just a matter of my view is it's a matter of just getting started, building up that network that I've talked probably ad nauseum about beforehand, and leveraging it.
Completely, yeah, I completely agree. There are so many avenues for capital raising across New Zealand, particularly at the early stage at the moment, from angel investors through to the banks, as you mentioned, and then VCs as well. There's the VC space is really growing across New Zealand currently. So I'm very conscious of time, and I know we've run a bit over, but I really did want to answer a few of the questions from our audience. For the questions that didn't get answered, if you are keen to talk to any of our panelists, please let me know or let Kea know, and we can definitely connect you directly with each of our panelists today. But thank you to all of the panelists, Paul, Shaneen, Francis and Brandon. Really appreciate the time you've taken today to share all your thoughts. And to all of you for joining us, we really appreciate you sharing your questions, and hope you got some really interesting insights about starting a business here in New Zealand. And as I mentioned earlier, a copy of this recording will be available on the Kea website later today. But if you need anything else, Kea is here to help you, and just get in touch anytime. Kia pai tora.